Good day. Welcome to the morning meeting, extending the presumption of grace to the Hegseth family. And I mean that. No family wants to go through what they're going through now. We'll talk about his confirmation prospects, but just sat through a relatively, for me, painful interview with his mom. We'll show you some of that. We'll run through the news of the day. We'll kick it around a bit, and then we'll ask you for your questions. If you're here on the two-way platform, please, if you are here, raise your hand, get in the conversation. You can also enter text in the chat, although I can't promise you I'll read it. Sean likes to read it because he's a glutton for smut and garbage. If you're on two-way, you can do that, either of those. If you're on Zoom, YouTube, you can't raise your hand, but you can pollute the chat, or you can put stuff in the chat that's helpful, interesting, bringing us together. This is a platform for everybody, for all voices, no matter who you voted for, no matter what you think of Donald Trump, no matter what you think of Pete Hegseth. Every voice is heard here, considered, thought about, responded to. So we're grateful to you for being part of this. Thank you. Welcome in. This is the two-way experience, brought to you by no one. But if you're someone who'd like to sponsor the morning meeting, reach out to us. We're open to that. Here we go. Joe Biden has a few more events in Africa. I think they're basically done. He's winging his way back here to the US of A after his trip there. Still no comments from him on his pardon of his son, but an important trip, without a doubt, to Africa. The vice president, again, as always, the rituals of this program are so important. Say it with me. The vice president will be in Washington, D.C., where she will receive briefings and conduct internal meetings with staff. These meetings, Dan, will be closed press.
Yes, they will.
Donald Trump and Vice President-elect Vance, no known public events at this time, but you can bet they're busy. We'll talk about what they might be up to. Congress, both chambers in town, lots of discussion within the Republican Party about reconciliation and how that's going to work. We'll talk about that. Some surprises, at least to me, about how Republicans are proceeding and what will be, besides the must-pass bills, the two big efforts of the Republicans, at least, in 2025. 10 o'clock, Speaker Johnson and his deputies are holding a press conference. 2:30, Vivek Ramaswamy is appearing at the Aspen Security Forum DC edition. That streams live. You can find it on the Aspen Security Forum website, or if you get my Daybook newsletter through Substack, you'll find a helpful link right through there. All right. Our first topic, gentlemen, and good morning to you. How's everyone doing?
Good morning, Mark. I'm well.
I'm great, thanks.
So one of the things we say about this program, as you guys know, and most people watching know, is we try to have it give you a sophisticated window into what actually happens behind the scenes in some of these political dramas that play out on the public stage. And if you've covered or watched a confirmation fight where the question of whether the nominee will make it, one of the things that's a particularly poignant and important moment is when there's division between the transition or the administration, if they've already taken office, and the camp of the person who wants to be confirmed. Today, does Donald Trump want Pete Hegseth to be confirmed? I'd say he does. Does Pete Hegseth want to be confirmed? I'd say he does. Is their outlook the same about the chances that that will happen? Not in the least. We've been talking about that here for a couple days. And last night, the breaking point came as the president-elect began to talk more openly. He'd been talking openly about it for at least a day, about other potential candidates, including potentially the governor of Florida. So does Hegseth survive? If not, is it DeSantis? And if it's not DeSantis, who is it? Those are kind of the three questions I'm thinking about. On the first point, there's a huge effort in the last 15 hours to try to save the nomination. Now, when nominations are teetering, it's possible to save them. Sometimes they're dead and the nominee doesn't know it. That's, I think, the case here, and I think it's been true for a few days. There are just too many Republican senators who won't vote for this person for different reasons. There's about a half dozen separate reasons that people are latching onto. The effort to save the nomination is occurring on Twitter, on cable TV, and it's multi-pronged. Last night, NBC ran a story quoting anonymous Fox employees, current and former, claiming on one of the 6 tributaries to excessive drinking that they regularly experienced their colleague, Pete Hegseth, drinking. Put up the tweet, please. So this is a tweet and it's representative of many tweets that are out there from people at Fox and associated with Pete Hegseth saying they've never seen this type of behavior. So this is the wrong one. Sorry, different tweet. Switch out to get us to the right one, please. So Sean, this first tweet is from a Fox colleague of Pete Hegseth. Can you tell? I want you to identify the tweeters in each case. Who is this person? Again, we got to switch out the tweet, guys.
Yeah, I was going to say the first one is I think separate.
Yeah, we'll get it. But you know who it's from. Tell people who she is.
Yeah, so Rachel Campos Duffy is the wife of Sean Duffy, who was also on Fox. He hosted a business show. He is the nominee to be Secretary of Transportation. But Rachel is one of the co-hosts of Fox and Friends Weekend, where Pete and Will Cain were also co-hosts. So Will Cain immediately put out a tweet that said, "This is BS." He actually said the full word, but we are a morning show. And then Rachel tagged on to that, basically saying, neither Will or I, and obviously those are the two colleagues that Pete sits on that couch with every morning, were contacted, commented, nor have ever seen anything. So, which I think is a smart tactic, and obviously, true. But by the way, can I just use some discretion here? Little Fox side note. I am seeing a lot of activity in all the chats about how well Dan did last night on Fox on Jesse's show. So I just little shout out to Dan. It's obviously well noted in the comments last night. So
Dan, tell us about your Fox debut. Dan, how'd that go?
Well, thank you for the person who recommended me, who happens to be on here. It was awesome. It was great. Jesse could not have been kinder and more gracious. And the Democratic Party is the gift that keeps on giving to Jesse and colleagues over at Fox. So it was a great opportunity. It was a lot of fun, and thank you for the recognition.
We're excited about Dan's exploding career in media.
Today, I think the next.
Oh, can I just add, sorry, Sean, before you go on? I was told that most of Fox News watches our show. So if they're watching, hello, and that they find us very insightful and a place to get real inside scoops. So shout out to this.
All makes sense now.
While Sean talks, put the tweet back up, please. That same tweet.
Yeah. So I think that, look, just kind of forwarding this a little bit. Today is going to be crucial. You heard comments from Senator Cynthia Lummis yesterday, Senator Lindsey Graham.
Wait a minute, hold on. Sean, am I going too slow for you? I'm trying to tee up this conversation.
No. I just talked about Rachel and who she is and who she's sitting next to.
So
Will Cain, well-dressed on the left in the gray suit.
So hold on. Let me just run through a few more elements, okay?
No.
Sorry. So this tweet is representative of a tactic to attack the media and to testify that some of the allegations are false. Next tweet, please, from Mr. Sean Davis. Sean Spicer, who is Sean Davis?
Sean Davis is the co-founder and CEO of The Federalist. That's the place where you might know Molly Hemingway is at, other folks very influential on the right.
Right. So this tweet is, to me, extraordinary because it's opening up a new front in offense and defense. And Sean Davis, who's a serious person, says that sources are telling him that the Wall Street Journal story is false and that what's driving the opposition to Pete Hegseth is not principled objections to some aspects of his past personal and professional life, but that Lindsey Graham and Joni Ernst want to hold on to the forever wars. Sean, what do you think of this tactic?
Well, look, obviously, I don't have any inside knowledge of it, just to be clear, but it actually, this is the kind of stuff that's going on, which is you have folks that, I mentioned yesterday, I think that we talked about Joni Ernst, how she was playing this vis-a-vis coming out in favor of Kash Patel. I think that this is going to carry a lot of water. This is now going to reinforce a good chunk of the Hegseth support team, which is, hey, these are all baseless attacks. There are people that are trying to undo, and it plays right into the narrative. I was down at Mar-a-Lago. There are people that are attacking the nominees because they don't like them or because someone that they supported wanted someone else. I'm not surprised by this at all. I think Pete Hegseth, I talked to some very senior folks last night in the DOD community who are very excited about Pete Hegseth because they're tired, and they're not, again, But
Sean, if you're in charge of congressional relations for the transition and for the White House, do you want Pete Hegseth's allies attacking senators who have to vote on his confirmation?
But it's not a question of whether you want it. No. So like an Eric Uland, who you saw guiding Hegseth the other day in that photo, like, do you want that noise? No, but you need some way of showing, look, if you're Hegseth today, you have 24 hours, maybe 48, to show Donald Trump that there's an attack, but this is a baseless. This is because I want to implement your agenda. This is what's going on, but I'm fighting for you. I'm willing to fight for these attacks if you'll stick by me. But Hegseth right now needs to show that he's got support, that this is an unfounded attack because they're trying to undermine the America First, shake up the world agenda that they've got going on, especially at a place like DOD. So you don't necessarily want it, but he needs something out there to say, this isn't real. See what they're doing. This is why, right?
So, okay. So just to frame that, to make sure I understand what you're saying, they're blind quotes in the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere that basically, if you're a sophisticated reader, say Mar-a-Lago doesn't think the guy's going to make it, and it's just a matter of time unless he can somehow magically turn things around. And you've got Donald Trump talking to Ron DeSantis about the job. So in the end, the only way Pete Hegseth is going to be confirmed is if he gets the vote of 50 Republican senators. But it seems to me what you're saying is that's the ultimate goal. But in the short term, he's got to have MAGA revved up and Donald Trump see people are supporting him.
Yeah, so he's on a seesaw right now. And that seesaw, the second that it tips beyond, like, this is Trump world for you. The second that the seesaw goes too high and you can't overcome it, you're not coming back down. And right now, Pete needs to pile on, show he has support, show he's fighting, show he's defending himself. I mean, this is sort of a la Kavanaugh right now, which is, if you're not going to fight for yourself, I'm not going to fight for you. And I got somebody who can take your place. So Pete has, in my opinion, about 24, 36 hours. He needs these people that have been skeptical of him. And I know he's got a series of meetings today with people like Lindsey Graham, Joni Ernst. He needs them to come out publicly today and say, I met with Pete. He alleviated my concerns and I'm behind him. But he can't afford to have this drip, drip, drip right now. And that's why I'm saying having people like Sean Davis in your corner is important, and basically making it clear that it's, that these are baseless, that there's an attempt to get you, and that the reason that they're trying to get you isn't because necessarily of you, because you are the agent of Donald Trump, and they're really trying to get at his agenda. So, to your point, that's why they're doing it. And I think it's helpful to him for now.
Okay, Dan, what are your thoughts on these dynamics, which don't really differ except for the specifics of Donald Trump? What are your thoughts on the dynamics of a nominee in trouble throwing the kitchen sink the way Sean's describing?
Yeah, I mean, I think we never really saw this counter offensive from the base for Matt Gaetz. So it's interesting that there is now this pressure, because what we saw with Gaetz was the senators that were going to vote no didn't really explicitly come out publicly. It's not good for them, for their base politics. They went privately and said this isn't going to happen. And Trump then just said, okay, and they made the decision. Now that the base is starting to rev up and there is public clamoring, now the question is, do the Joni Ernst of the world go and privately say, like, I would imagine she's going to come out and say relatively positive things without being committal to Hegseth after her meeting. And then what does Trump do? Like, if he throws, Pete under the bus now and the base is all fired up, that could create a little bit of some uncertainty.
Well, especially if
comfort for him.
Yeah, the DeSantis thing actually helps Pete. And I'll tell you why, because
I've noticed that he's not popular with the base.
Right, he's not popular with MAGA, and I think that people go, see, this is the plot. Get rid of someone like Pete, who's going to be a fighter for us, and replace him with somebody who.
So put up the third tweet.
So it's
and
smart.
This illustrates exactly what Sean's saying.
This is smart stuff to do a counteroffensive.
Look, I just again the nuance, please. And Dan touched on this, but the nuance with Gaetz is that Gates's problems were about Gaetz, allegations about things that he did or said or acted upon, right? So it was Matt Gaetz's personal baggage. What they're doing now is trying to turn this away from Pete and make it about the agenda. And that's the smart thing about this, is that you're going back, and what people like Sean Davis and others are doing, and this counteroffensive with we'll get to it in a minute, but I know that Pete's mom was on Fox and Friends this morning, and having people come out and do this is trying to show that that it's not about him. This is about, you're trying to, you just don't like him because he wants to implement Donald Trump's agenda and, you know, end wokeness and DEI and all this kind of stuff. So they have made a very smart tactical turn because they're trying to turn it away from Pete's personal issues to an attack on the agenda overall.
All right, so here's another tweet. Last one we'll show, and then we will show a bit of Pete Hegseth's mom. Brendan Dilley is a part of a team of folks who made extraordinarily effective videos in both the general election and earlier in the nomination fight. Some of their best videos from an artistic point of view were negative attacks on Ron DeSantis. And here you have Brendan Dilley saying, as Sean suggested, MAGA doesn't like Ron DeSantis. Partly they don't like him because he ran against Donald Trump. He's not particularly un-MAGA, but this is, as Sean suggested, an indication that if DeSantis is the alternative, parts of MAGA at least will rally. There are some people in the defense establishment who actually would much prefer DeSantis. They think he's a very strong candidate to do exactly what Donald Trump and Musk and Ramaswamy want done at the Pentagon. All right, one more element here. Pete Hegseth's mom was on Fox. There was some talk they'd be on together. It was just her. Long interview. I watched the whole thing. We're not going to show you the whole thing, but I do want to show you one soundbite from it. And then Dan and Sean, get your reaction to whether you think this helps Pete Hegseth's cause or not. Go ahead and play number 2, please.
Difficult time. I want to say something about the media. And part of today is to discredit the media and how they operate. When they contact you,
saying the quiet part out loud.
But then they call you and say they threaten you. That's the first thing they do. Right. They say, unless you make a statement, we will publish it as is. And I think that's a despicable way to treat anyone. Threats are dangerous, and they.
So to recap, you were angry about what was going on, his behavior during the divorce. Right. And so you wrote that email. And then, you know, a couple hours later, you apologized. Mm-hmm. And you guys talked and you worked it out?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Pete and I are very close today. In fact, our whole family is very tight-knit.
All right. So, Dan, you first. Is that effective? Is that helping the cause of her son for her to go on and basically not address any of the specifics, just to say my son's a great guy, great father, great son? Does that help or hurt or nothing from your point of view?
I mean, it humanizes him, right? He is not just an alpha man with all these allegations. He is somebody's child and is loved. And I think just as Brett Kavanaugh's wife sitting behind him was helpful. And so I think it's the best hand that they can try to play. And as Sean said, she's not talking about him, but about the media. And, you know, that tends to roil people up. And so I think it's smart. I don't know if it's going to be sufficient, but it's smart.
So I would just, the one, this is tangential to this, but the one person that we haven't gotten around to talking about is a guy named Chad Chronister. And Chad was the nominee. He's the Hillsborough sheriff down in Florida. He was the nominee to be DEA. He withdrew yesterday. And it was largely because of MAGA, right? People calling out his stances on what he did during COVID. He jailed a pastor for having services, and MAGA undid him. And this is why, and this is important to understand, that there was no stories in the Washington Post about Chad Chronister and his, you know, DEA. It was MAGA influencers and not I don't know that Brendan Dilley weighed in or Sean Davis weighed in, but that's the kind of influence that those folks have in the sphere right now. Trump saw the MAGA folks say, this guy is not one of us. Here's what he did during COVID. And the guy withdrew. What the Hegseth team is doing right now is they're basically using that playbook and saying, okay, we need MAGA to support Pete. We need to show it's about him. We need to show it's about the agenda. Putting his mom out on Fox this morning was fantastic. I thought for a woman who's probably never done media before, she did a phenomenal job. It was, you know, I don't know this. I didn't ask, but she looks like she got crammed, you know, 4 months of media training into about an hour. She did phenomenal. And she explained very methodically the circumstances, what her beliefs were, why she sent what she did, and I thought that clip that you played was very instructive. Because again, that plays not only to Trump, but to the MAGA base who say, yep, this is how the media treats people. This is what's going on. And he starts to garner some sympathy. So that's where I go back to the seesaw today. I think they played this morning brilliantly. And if they can continue to get some public voices out there that reassure Donald Trump that he can get to 50, it's going to be fine. If a Cynthia Loomis comes out or a Lindsey Graham even and says, I'm out, right? We've got to assume that Collins, Murkowski, and probably McConnell are no's. Maybe not definite. I know Collins hasn't said anything, but if that was that's got to be your thinking going into this. So you really can only lose one more publicly. And as soon as that happens, he's in big trouble. So what he needs to do today is to pile on with the MAGA influencers, number one. And number two is get some of these folks, even if they're not like a hard, like yesterday he had Josh Hawley come out. And that was helpful. Again, no one was questioning it, but it was that public-facing support that is super helpful right now that Donald Trump will see and say, okay, he does have support. He does have it. Where Gates had a problem is that very few people really were going out on a limb and publicly saying, yeah, I'm a yes on Gates.
So I thought your performance was great, but you didn't address any of the six concerns that Republican senators who have concerns have. She literally was offered the opportunity to address some of them. She addressed none of them. So I'm not saying it's counterproductive, but I don't see it as nearly as helpful as you do. Sean, doesn't it seem if Donald Trump's out there talking to Ron DeSantis about the job, he's already moved on?
That's why I'm telling you that seesaw matters. Because this is how he works. And he starts to create a backup plan. And that's once the narrative overcomes. I mean, look, I don't mean to make this about me, but I remember part of the reason I resigned when I did is it was inevitable. I mean, Donald Trump was very kind when I offered my resignation, said, I want you to stick around and all that stuff. But the bottom line is I knew that my time was up. Now, I could have stuck around for another week, maybe 2, 3 at most, and then I would have been fired. So the question at some point, it's the wave overcomes and there's nothing you can do to hold it back. And so,
right, Sean, just want to draw on your expertise about Donald Trump and Susie Wiles. They're at least open to considering someone who, a few months ago was like their mortal enemy. They were mocking him. They were, trying to pulverize him. How does Donald Trump go from trying to pulverize, and how does Susie Wiles, who left the DeSantis camp on bad terms, how do they say, yeah, this is the best person we want to bring inside the tent? How does that work?
Look, here's my belief on this. I believe that there's a bigger play at hand. DeSantis needs some sort of political future. One was to appoint a caretaker like James Untermeyer and say, okay, do this. I run for Senate. Now I can go hang out in the Senate until my time comes again or something like that. I believe that they're basically making him a deal. Okay, here's the deal. We get to choose the nominee to replace the Senate seat. We'll give you a landing at DOD. And then now you've got a future. You're the SecDef for 4 years, maybe 2. Maybe you run. I mean, Donald Trump. He's like, look, get some DOD credentials, and then make your own decision about 2028, and I'll stay out of it. I don't know, but I'm thinking that if you're DeSantis, you're intrigued because it gives you a landing. If you're Trump, it gives you a deal where you get to potentially make a bigger play on the Senate nominee to replace Rubio. That's my only belief on this, because I agree. I think that it's probably easier for Donald Trump to get over this than I do for Susie.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right, mandatory exit question. On a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is 0 probability and 10 is ontological certitude, what are the odds that Pete Hegseth raises his hand, takes an oath, and becomes America's defense secretary? Dan.
2. Very
John.
unlikely.
7.
Wrong. The answer is 1/2. 1/2. All right.
Wait, Mark, can I say, though, one thing about DeSantis that I'm curious about? And that is, what does J.D. Vance think about that? Because I agree with Sean. It is a landing spot for DeSantis to kind of further build credentials for 2028 and be seen as someone who, like, got rid of DEI at Pentagon and made us safer. I can't imagine J.D. Vance is excited to have him in the cabinet.
Maybe, but it means he's got a job and he can't go to Iowa and New Hampshire.
Oh, there are military bases in every state in the country.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. Good question.
His replacement would be a Latina woman governor of Florida who would become the instant favorite to be VP.
All right, let's get through some rapid round here. Just a few more questions. Who now, after Hegseth, who do you see as the most endangered of the other nominees? Dan.
I didn't really think anyone, but actually while we were talking, I just see the Hill says Tulsi Gabbard's in trouble with the GOP, which I find surprising. Maybe RFK if he can't answer the abortion and the healthcare questions, but otherwise I think they all go through.
They all go. Okay, you say no one. Sean?
I actually think that Tulsi's probably the hardest, because of some of the same stuff. Like there's enough people that have expressed concerns about meeting that she's had, and the problem with Tulsi is that she obviously scorched earth her own party. So I mean, outside of maybe Bernie, and who knows, I don't feel like the Hawaii senators are going to give her any deference, but whatever. There's just not enough senators that, I mean, she was a Democrat that spoke out within the last few years about Republicans and things. And so there's no love loss right now for her at a position like DNI. So I would agree that. I will say the funny thing about all of this, having conversations all yesterday, I think to flip the script, I'll put Kash Patel at a 9.5 on the 10 scale to be the next FBI director. He is, I mean, this guy, you know, when you talk, when you shoot the gap, he is just perfect timing on this.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree with you about Tulsi at this point. All right. We could talk for an hour, or I could anyway, about the reconciliation. There are two things that seem to be happening. One is the House and Senate don't agree yet on how to sequence this stuff. That Senate wants to do a reconciliation bill that deals with energy and the border and the military in the spring, late winter, early spring, and they want to defer to the fall to do a big tax bill. Number one, there seems to be bicameral disagreement within the party, and number two, contrary to my hope and expectation, there seems to be no indication that they have any interest in working with Democrats on either bill, even though I think they could get Democratic votes if they tried. Dan, what are your thoughts on reconciliation in brief?
So I know this well from my lobbying days. I mean, one, you can only do one per budget year, which is why you're seeing this sequencing of the fall, because the new fiscal year starts in September or at the end of it. Look, I think it's hard. I mean, without getting into what the Byrd rule, means, not everything that they want to do can get into reconciliation. It has to be a budget, either produce revenue or reduce revenue. This is going to get hard. I mean, Sean mentioned it. Historically, people have fired the Senate parliamentarian when he or she has not ruled the way they want. But, we'll see. Mitch McConnell and others, I may defend some of this stuff. And look, go big or go home. I mean, I think the bottom line is a bipartisan deal takes time and takes compromise. And I don't think Trump is in the mood to do either. He wants to put points on the board, and he doesn't really care whether, 5 Democrats agree to it or not.
So I always wondered, it was like taking Latin in high school, what it would come in useful, but my 2.5 years as the budget committee spokesman has finally come into play. Just to be clear for everyone watching that doesn't understand the alphabet soup, reconciliation, as Dan mentioned, is a process by which you can move a vehicle in the House and the Senate. It only requires 50 votes in the Senate, which is why it's so attractive. But it can't have direct policy implications without a revenue impact. So it's meant to affect revenue, specifically, hopefully deficits, more importantly. But the idea in the Byrd rule, it comes down to specifically whether or not what is germane in the Senate. And that's what this is all about. I mean, the House doesn't care about reconciliation as much as the Senate does. So that's why this process matters. What you get it's sort of like, what can you fit in the car? Yep. And that's what the only stuff that will get you to point B from point A. So how they sequence this matters. You saw Jason Smith, the House Ways and Means Committee chairman yesterday, basically throwing up John Thune's idea of both idea and sequencing, because they really want to get the tax bill done first. And if I were them, I agree with this. The one thing you need to get those tax credits, renewed is critical for Trump and Trump's agenda, because if people are facing an imminent tax bill, that's more important than anything else.
Sean,
all right, hands up if you want to ask a question.
Heard someone explain it.
I've got two pieces of news. One's in the form of a quiz. Bad news, very frightening. The CEO of United Healthcare, named Brian Thompson, was killed outside the New York Hilton Hotel this morning by a gunman. That's where Donald Trump held his election night event in 2016. It's about a mile from where I'm sitting. And this will be a big story today for all sorts of reasons. Here's the other question. I'm going to read you guys a tweet. You tell me who tweeted it. Ready? Pete Hegseth's mom on Fox and Friends this morning defending her son. She points out that she sent an emotional email and then apologized 2 hours later. The media never talks about the apology because they're trying to destroy him, not tell the truth. Sean, who tweeted that?
God, this is I'm torn. I'm looking in the chat. I feel like
Were there any
Regis, can I phone a
Were there
friend?
any all caps in there?
Yeah. What's
There are
the
no all caps. It's
Okay.
properly. He didn't put Fox. I'm saying it's a he. He didn't put Fox and Friends in quotes. Otherwise, it's perfectly well punctuated. All right,
JD
JD, you want to guess?
I'm gonna say JD Vance.
You're both correct. JD Vance. So maybe he's doing that because Dan's right. He doesn't want Ron DeSantis to be defense secretary, but that's obviously welcome support for the Hegseth family. All right.
Hey, one
Last
other factor
topic.
that's interesting, by the
Yeah.
way, someone pointed this out to me last night, so I can't take credit for the thought, but there's an Elon Musk equation in here. Right. Elon's got a lot of assets that matter to DOD. And so his relationship with the SecDef is going to be important. So just keep that in mind. What is, if you've got Elon whispering in President Trump's ear that, hey, stick with Hegseth, that's going to matter for a lot of reasons.
I agree. Although according to the Wall Street Journal, Elon wants it to be someone with a technology background. He's already floated at least one name. All right, last topic. Rahm Emanuel did interviews with Ezra Klein and Brett Stevens of the New York Times editorial page. To me, not necessarily the path to grassroots victory of the DNC chair, but then with an interview at the Chicago, was it the Tribune or the Sun-Times? I forget. He took himself out. So those who are hoping for Rahm Emanuel run for chair, he's not. I continue to believe that Ben Wickler, the Wisconsin chair, is the front runner for a variety of reasons. Dan, you have thoughts and news on that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think Rahm saw the writing on the wall that this was just not, he was not making headway with the base. So there's a group called Third Way in Washington, D.C. that, as the name suggests, is a kind of represents the moderate wing of the Democratic Party. And the head of it, since its founding, is a guy named John Cowan. And John wrote an op-ed today endorsing Ben Wickler, saying that, one, he's not from a coastal state. Two, his age, he's youth, he's 42 years old. And three, that he has a history of getting both the moderate wing and the progressive wing to work sufficiently together to win statewide races, and that these three things make him the right choice. And that is very, very surprising. One, because of who Third Way is. And two, and full disclosure, they were a client of mine at one point, and I worked with John. It is unlikely John would have written that without talking to his board of directors, who are some of the biggest donors in the party. And so it does give the implication that some of the money in the party is lining up behind Ben Wickler. And at the same time, you have the guy from Minnesota who keeps just very quietly saying, I got a lot of delegates and I'm kind of behind the scenes making headway. So this could turn into a Big Ten battle between Minnesota and Wisconsin.
Dan, is Third Way the equivalent of the DLC, that Clinton organization? Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Ideologically it doesn't do the same kind of stuff, but ideologically it is.
Yes.
Well, this, by the way, this goes back to two things about the Rahm thing. And this is something that we've talked about before. Remember, these organizations are clubby, the RNC and the DNC, like the members there. Yes, they are influenced, but there's the relationships. This is a massive student council election. And so the relationships that they have, and Rahm knows better than anybody else how the DNC works, where the delegates are, where the members of the DNC are, and what it takes to get there. And at some point, from a credibility and a stature standpoint, he made the smart move, which was to say, I'm not going to win. I don't want to look like I lost. I can't afford to lose to, I'm the ambassador to Japan. I'm the former White House chief of staff, mayor of Chicago. I can't lose. So I think he knew exactly what was happening. But this gets back to this idea that, the Minnesota guy, like if these are your buddies that you've been working with and you can count the votes, I don't know, if they have 1,000, you can get to 500, you win or whatever. I don't know. But this is an inside baseball game.
Yep. All right. Two more bits of news and then we'll go to your questions. Do you have Pete Hegseth's tweet? Can you put that up? So Pete Hegseth tweeted this morning defiantly, and it's been retweeted by a lot of his supporters. And then he just said to reporters on Capitol Hill, I spoke to the president-elect this morning. He said, keep going, keep fighting. Why would I back down? I've always been a fighter. And that rhymes with this tweet that he put out a little bit earlier today about how the attacks against him are just smears. I don't think Susan Collins is going to fall for a smear. I don't think Lisa Murkowski will. I don't think Joni Ernst will. If there's smears, he'll be confirmed. If the allegations are true, I don't think he will be. Okay.
I mean, this goes
And
to
meanwhile,
Sean's point.
just like meanwhile, more names are being floated for possible replacements, and they're not coming out of nowhere. They're being talked about at Mar-a-Lago. Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
I was going to say that just goes to Sean's point that he is now the nominee himself is flipping this from, you know, me to the agenda, to the president, to the it's smart. I mean, it's the best hand he has. And again, the longer he stays in this, the more uncomfortable this is going to get for Republican senators, because we spent a lot of time about this on Gates, which is, does any senator want to publicly take on the base and Donald Trump? They all stayed private on Gates. Every day that goes by, they're going to have to, and they're going to go home this weekend, come out and say where you are. And that gets really, really, really uncomfortable.
Sarah, welcome in. Thank you for joining. Tell folks who don't know where you are, anything else about yourself you'd like to share, and what's on your mind.
Sure. I live on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. I was never Trumper who voted for Trump. I consider myself a McCain Republican, but I'm a registered independent. Thanks for having me, Mark. I started watching this show probably 4 weeks before the election, and I've got to say it gave me more clarity than I could get from any other source in any other collective group of sources. I actually, as the process went on before the election, I became more and more confused by everything going on in the media. So I do really appreciate this. And I have,
Thank you. That's very nice of you, Sarah. Thank you.
3 quick points and then 1 question. First of all, in terms of your long-term plan for the two-way platform, I hope that you create some type of junior platform that really aims at having people like Dan and Sean, but in their 20s. I think that we need to reach all age groups in terms of looking at things from a very fair perspective. And given the way they look at media and how they intake their news, I hope something like this grows into that demographic, even though I know you've got a lot of younger people on this listening. Second of all, look forward to you guys booking Boston. I will, when you show up live, I will get all my friends there. And
Sarah,
then,
real quick,
Yep.
would you rather go to Boston or conveniently go to Providence, which is so much easier to fly into?
I would love to go to Providence. I'll get all my.
That's
Yeah,
right.
that is awesome. And I know why you're saying that. And also I'm trying
It's
to figure
easier to
out,
get to from the Cape.
yeah. Are you drinking chocolate milk this morning?
No, it's iced coffee.
Oh, okay. Dan, such a great surprise last night to see you. I'm watching you every day. You feel like your friend is on Jesse Waters. So that was fantastic. So here's my question. Right now we have a lot of governors and mayors coming out saying they're sanctuary cities, and you all have discussed it a little bit, but I feel like the conversation obviously is really centered on confirmations. I think this is going to cause more problems for the Democrats than they can possibly imagine. Even in a state like mine, where I think maybe there were 30% of us who voted Republican, I think the governor could run into trouble. I think Mayor Wu in the city of Boston can run into trouble. I think once we start looking at the financials behind what is going on and how people's tax dollars are being spent, 2 years from now could be big for the Republicans. Dan, do you agree? Do you all agree with this? And how do you switch the conversation to help the party? Because right now, I think the Democrats are so focused on reorganizing and doing postmortems that they're putting themselves in a worse position.
Yeah,
Great question.
great set of questions. And by the way, it's the first, great idea on the younger people. And that for the first time, I feel very old hearing that because I am not in my 20s anymore. I think this is actually a huge issue, Sarah. And even here in New York, there is controversy in the last 48 hours because the mayor is going to talk to the Trump administration about how to deal with illegal immigrants. And the left went crazy that he should not even talk to the administration. I met recently with someone in New York City who's thinking of running for mayor. And this person said, I am 100% going to fight if I'm elected the Trump administration on rounding up illegal immigrants. And my advice was, I'd be really careful assuming all immigrants are the same. Because I think if I were the Democratic Party, I think the Trump administration is going to start with illegal immigrants who have committed crimes. We should not defend, in my opinion, illegal immigrants who have committed crimes staying in the country. You know, they're kind of 0 for 2 there. And so I think the party does need to come to the table. Clearly, the public thinks there's a problem, and you're in the business of representing the people. And secondly, the strain on city budgets is astronomical. I mean, in New York City, it is a huge, huge problem. I mean, the city can't afford it. It is cutting services left and right to try to pay for what is mandated. New York City even went so far as to give ATM cards to people, which outraged the working class across this city, all races, all demographics. So to your point, I think Democrats should come to the table and have a reasonable set of conversations and support some of what Donald Trump is talking about. There are parts that will probably be extreme in our opinion, and they should stand on principle and fight that. But to just blanketly say no way, no how, I think is not smart whatsoever. And by the way, I don't do any political consulting anymore. It was just to give somebody some advice.
Hey, Sean, just to offer you a way to frame it, you can ignore my thing, but what can and will the Trump administration do to pressure Democratic mayors and governors?
Oh, I just, it's funny it's because I was just pulling this up. This is Mayor Adams last night talking about, like, so you have the mayor of New York basically saying, I'll read it quick. It just says, he dared the left to cancel him working with border czar Tom Homan and Trump. Quote, cancel me because I'm going to protect the people of this city. He said illegals are, quote, committing crimes, robberies, shooting at police, raping innocent, hold on, it keeps going on, blah, 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 innocent people. The bottom line is that at some point you don't have to. Let Mayor Adams speak for it and say, well, are you with Mayor Adams or me? Because and so I agree with you, Sarah. I think that more of these mayors are going to say we're on the wrong side of this. So I don't know that the Trump administration is going to have to do that much if they play this right, because you're going to see Democrats wanting to get on the right side of this. The Chicago mayor eviscerated in that public town hall the other day by his own citizens saying, how dare you say you're not going to work with Trump? I mean, it was great theater. But the bottom line is, I don't even know how much, if they're smart, they sit back and just point out and say, I'm with Mayor Adams, or I'm with, so-and-so. So there are going to be some holes where, like the mayor of Boston, I don't think Wu cares what Donald Trump thinks or anyone on the right. But she is going to find herself, I think, in the minority of a lot of big city mayors. And this is going to be a bigger problem, I think, for the Democrats, who then start to, kind of create an insular firing squad, because they're going to talk about who cares more about people, et cetera, et cetera. So the bigger on their side, they've got to worry about that. On our side, I would be careful that we don't overstep. It's how do we not let them shoot at each other, not us. But I think you're absolutely right on that platform. I'm a little appalled that you don't think I'm in my 20s. I'm now doubling down on my moisturizer. But I will, and Mark, real quick, as we're talking, and I was looking for that tweet to show, it's amazing the strategy that we're talking about with Hegseth I'm watching media reporters. One guy wrote, I've been covering Fox for 10 years at media. I've never heard a single piece of gossip about Pete. I mean, they're doing a phenomenal job of doing this. Sarah, I did have one question for you. How do you go from a never Trumper to voting for Trump and watching Jesse Waters? What issue was it that brought you over?
So I've always watched a few shows on Fox, like Brett Baer, The Five, and tried to get more of the, not the editorial shows. I happened to turn on Jesse last night. In terms of how I went from a never Trumper, I did vote for Hillary Clinton in 2016. I thought that Donald Trump did a great job the first 3 years of his presidency. I was a little disappointed in his fourth year. I deeply regret my decision to vote for Biden, and it's difficult in a state like this. I think a lot of people don't realize they don't really know what they're voting for. And I think I'm a very well educated person, and it's very hard to figure out the truth going back years and years and years. So I don't think I made the right decision, but I feel that, so I'm an independent. When we walk into a primary, we have a choice in the state of Massachusetts. Do we want to vote in the Democrat primary or the Republican? I feel the Democrats denied me democracy with the way they handled this election. That is not the only reason why I switched. I switched for a whole host of reasons. I couldn't, like Dan, I'm not going to say anything you haven't already said. You couldn't even figure out what their platform was. So I do believe, I think Donald Trump was my best bet. I don't love the guy, but I think he will prevent, I like the idea he's going to get us out of wars. I also think he's not afraid to tackle some tough issues and move on. And that leads me, one last thing, Mark, one last suggestion I have as you grow and you continue to grow. A lot of the topics that you discussed on your show ahead of the election have dropped off. Yet culturally, I still think we need to discuss them and discuss them in a mature manner. I am a pro-life person. I have been my entire life, but I've got the biggest heart in the world. And I do think that there is room to help the country to understand that it was state versus federal in terms of a decision being made. And I think culturally, that's a topic that divides women. And actually, Sean, getting back to what you asked, I felt female shamed by the Democrats. It just got worse and worse. I really admired Michelle Obama until I felt like she said some horrible things about me. So I do think, I wish we get back to some of those sensitive topics that I don't think are going to play a large role in future politics, but I still think that your show helps people understand both sides and maybe can encourage more compromise on issues.
Okay. Sarah, really appreciate everything you said. Really interesting, really heartfelt and compelling. I'll try to be brief. The great thing about this platform is people can bring up any issues they want. If we weren't close, getting closer to the end, but that's a topic that people can bring up and other people can engage on. And it's a little harder for us to program post-election, right? Because we're up to the election, everybody's sort of interested in the same things. You're interested in that. There are people on this platform who want more reconciliation talk. There are people who just want to talk about who the nominees are going to be in 28. There are people who want to talk about tariffs. So we just prefer to let the community sort of raise topics. We raise some too, of course, but we appreciate you raising that. In terms of the future of the platform, I'm only on live 2 hours a day. The other 22 hours I spend talking to my colleagues about the future of two-way. And we like having, as your question suggested, we like having people of all ages and backgrounds on one conversation, so people hear a variety of points of view. But we also will do programming for younger people. We aspire to have a whole slate of programming that's two-way for kids, for real, young kids, to be part of this kind of format where they can learn and talk to each other. Particularly, one thing I'm super excited about is young kids with childhood diseases, to be able to spend time with kids who share their problems. So we have big aspirations to do stuff, and stay tuned. All right, Sarah, thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay. Daniel, come on in. Tell folks where you are who don't know what's on your mind. Got to unmute there. There you go.
Hello, you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
I want to first begin by thanking you for highlighting my tweet yesterday. That was a surreal moment for me. I'm the Brit, by the way. And
Yes,
so,
sir.
yeah,
That was a very nice
to have
tweet. For those who didn't see it, Daniel basically said Sean and Dan represent all of the United States and what's good about America. I'm paraphrasing, but it roughly was right.
That
Thank you
isn't
for the
quite
tweet.
what I said.
Yeah,
You know,
fine. Thank you for the tweet. Welcome in.
I just want to two comments. The first one is about the fact that I find it amusing that the US ambassador to the UK is basically the same process as it is in the UK for the UK ambassador to the US, which is find some random big donor, find some random apparatchik, and just send them off to go enjoy fun time in foreign capital. And so, you know, the current Labour government's like, oh, we're going to send off some random grandee of the Labour Party, and they'll have fun in Washington. And anyway, so then my serious comment or question is for Dan, which is, you know, during this election, we heard a lot about young men are going to go for Trump. They just this is as if it was some sort of like, you know, foregone conclusion. Oh, you know, that's just going to happen. But I mean, like in 2020, the Democratic Party won young men by like 13 points, and so I find it astonishing that this is sort of a development that's sort of been like, oh yeah, that's just going to happen now. And so I think the question is like, how do Democrats actually get young men back on board? And considering the advertising that was going out for men in general was so bad, like the white dudes for Kamala ad, which basically didn't appeal to men's issues, didn't say, here's what we're going to do for you, here's how we're going to help you. It was all about basically vote for Kamala or you hate women, which is, you know, not a great persuasive tactic for, you know, a lot of young men. And so, and then there's like the other ads, which were like, your local Republican congressman, which was basically vote for Kamala, otherwise Donald Trump will ban pornography, which is something that, you know, a lot of young men use pornography, but they don't like that. They don't feel great pride in that. So I don't know why you'd appeal to that. So I guess that's just my question is, how do Democrats actually get young men back on board before it kind of results?
Great question, Daniel. Thank you. Dan.
Sure. I think you have to be authentic, and you have to show up and talk to them where they are. And one of the problems was that the Biden re-election campaign got started exceptionally late. They started raising money early, but in terms of like getting out there and the president communicating, you know, kind of explicitly with different segments, started very late. Really started around the State of the Union in March of 24. And so for the previous 4 years, there was not a lot of kind of, okay, what do we need to do to get ready for the re-election, which traditionally a president in his or her first term would basically start running the day that they get into office, you know, kind of below the surface and doing the things that you want to do. And then there was just this decision of like, oh, shoot, we are in trouble with men, with Latinos. We are going to double down where we think we can squeeze out more votes. And women were one of the first places that they turned. And to your point, they, you know, said it publicly. Everything they did was kind of targeted towards women, while Trump, you know, went the opposite direction. He still talked, you know, to female audiences and courted the female vote. But he very, you know, for years, Trump has now been going on these podcasts, showing up at football games and, you know, fights and, you know, cultural events that tend to attract lots of young men. So by the time we get to the fall, he seemed to be authentic about it. Like he was into the same things they're into. He talked to the people where they get their news and their information. And it was a logical extension to ask for their vote. And I think the Democratic Party, one of the things that's really frustrating in one of the interviews that David Plouffe gave was this idea of like, well, all the things that have been working against us were, you know, it started, we saw it in 2020, we saw it again in 2022 in the midterms. And one of the things that really hasn't been discussed is Jen O'Malley Dillon, Quentin Fox, other people were on the Biden campaign from early in 23. What did you do? I mean, I know the answer, like the candidate really couldn't do anything because of his decline of mental acuity. What did you do to try to fix these problems for 18 months while Donald Trump was trying to fend off Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley and like kind of battling for the right? The middle was wide open and you did nothing. You just raised money and like kind of told everyone there's nothing to see here and don't worry about it. So it's frustrating.
John.
I think that's the bottom line, right? This funny thing is we're talking. I'm a political hoarder of sorts. To my wife's dismay. And I was going to show you, this is so I dug this up. This is from 2015, and this goes back to, so Debbie Wasserman Schultz, November 17th, 2015. This is the Democrat Victory Task Force final report and action plan. And here's the interesting thing. Under the topic of messaging, one of the most striking findings of the task force initial conversations was the difficulty faced by candidates, elected officials, activists, and others in concisely and consistently answering the question, quote, what does it mean to be a Democrat? This was the report that they did in 2017. And you're basically asking the same question. Young men in particular, what does it mean to be a Democrat? You used to remember that old saying we have in America that, you know, if you're not a liberal when you're a kid, you don't have a heart. And if you're not one a conservative when you're older, you don't have a brain. And the problem is that if they lose that constituency, you know, they're in big trouble. And so if they can't answer the question, people like Sarah, obviously, you know, for different reasons, bringing it up. But the bottom line is that if a party existentially can't answer the question, what do we stand for? They have a problem. And that's where I think it's funny that you know, thank God I save everything. But, you know, that's November 2015. Here we are almost 10 years later, and they're still struggling with the question of what do we stand for?
Daniel, thanks for coming. If you make a trip to the colonies, please let us know. Grateful to you. All right, let's try to get a real quick one in. I may regret this, but let's try to get a quick one in before we have to go. Wayne, welcome in. Unmute. Tell us about you in however way you wish and what's on your mind, please.
Yeah. Let me lower my hand. Yeah, I'm from Southern Indiana. I'm a pastor here. Live just north of Evansville. I grew up in Alabama, and I'll just go to my question for Sean. Do you think it was a mistake for Trump to roll out these nominations so quickly, to basically just set them up for more gunfire, or do you think that it might have been better if he had held them off? You had any thoughts about that?
Great question, Wayne. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question, Wayne. And the answer is, I don't know yet. You know, let's go back and look at the batting average in January of 2020. I mean, January 20th. Last time we rolled them out slowly. I actually think when history, and I'm not trying to be, but I think there was some merit to how we did it last time in 2016. How we prepped candidates, how we got them out, but it was also a very different world. So it literally is apples and oranges, because Trump is much more involved in the personnel decisions this time in terms of knowing who he wants. I think there's a lot of merit to what he did this time. You get these guys up and running. You can get a lot of the policies ready to go. I think, as I've said, day one, the afternoon of January 20th, don't book anything, no spa appointments, because it's going to be fast and furious all afternoon with announcements and proclamations and executive orders and executive actions. So I think if we can get off the ground and get 90% of the key folks over the finish line, and they're hitting the ground running, and we can get a lot of Schedule Cs, those non-confirmable positions in early, then it'll be a huge success. But I think we won't be able to answer your question fully until probably February 20th, 30 days in. Are we actually getting stuff happening? And not just the people, because the people are a vehicle to moving the policy. So I think that I'd love to have you booked. We're going to pencil you in February 20th. Come on back. And I'd love to be able to answer your question more fully then, but we'll see. I mean, I think there's some significance to how it's happening now. But it's not just them getting over the finish line that's important to me. It's they get in and actually get stuff done right out of the gate.
Wayne, thank you for joining. Appreciate it.
Sure.
I'm sorry we're at time, and I need to go, because for those of you who need more of me, I'll be on Smirconish in 5 minutes. Wayne, thanks for joining. Please come back regularly. Gentlemen, I know you both are more bullish on Pete Hegseth's chances than I am. I'm impressed by the way he's getting JD Vance and others to rally behind him. But I believe by the time I convene everybody at 6 p.m. Eastern time for two-way tonight, his chances will look closer to where I have them than you. Maybe I'll be wrong, but that's what I believe will happen.
You think tomorrow morning, where do you think we are when we come on air at 9 a.m.?
You guys are saying, Mark, you're so freaking smart. I think he may be out tonight, tell you the truth. based on what I've been told, but we'll see. We'll see. That I think the reason my number might be too low is there's some indication they're going for just give him a hearing strategy, and trying to and telling Joni Ernst, if you want to vote him down in committee and on the floor, great, but he wants a hearing, and that might work. We'll see. Got to do more reporting. Thanks everybody. Sorry we didn't get to more of you with your hands up, but we had three great questioners, and we had to pay a fair amount of time homage Dan for his latest media enterprise, and to talk about our upcoming show in Providence, which I'll pencil in. Grateful to everybody for making time to spend an hour with us. We'll see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern time, and I'll see you at 6 p.m. Eastern time this evening on Two Way Tonight. Have a great day.